and TTVR and first-man and CMARC studies ongoing.
Once again, George, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for going after me. This has been an amazing experience for the last 2 days. Currently enrolling TMVR and TVR first-in-man CMARC studies. So everybody knows this line that TMVR is not TAVR, and the indication repair or replacement, there's a question. The size is a huge issue about the valve size in TMVR. The access is even more difficult, whether it's transapical or transeptal. And finally, fixation, a D-shaped non-calcified annulus in most cases. And then, as mentioned in the last 2 lectures, the LVOT obstruction issue, which is one of the biggest Achilles heels for TMVR. And then, even if you do a valve, there's evidence of leaflet degeneration and thrombosis. So these are some of the TMVRs in early experience. In fact, there are so many valves now available that I think there are more valves than patients. But anyway, just looking at the data over here, I'm just going to talk about some of them. So if you categorize these into 2 groups, the first are the transapical valves, which are primary, Tendyne, Medtronic Intrepid, Tiara, and then High Life. High Life can actually be done both ways, transeptal and transapical. And then on the transfemoral side, I'm going to talk mainly on Evoque, Caisson, Cardiovalve, High Life, and then Sapien M3. So when it comes to Tendyne, Tendyne has actually the most experience in the TMVR space. It's a D-shaped self-expanding nitinol frame. It's a large valve size matrix, and it comes in several sizes to match the D shape. But then you have a circular self-expanding nitinol inner frame with a large effective orifice area. And it's a porcine pericardial valve, and the valve is tethered to the apex, and that provides the stability. But the beauty of this technique is that it's fully retrievable and repositionable even after the valve placement. Now, this is very important because none of the other valve technologies can achieve that. That means once the valve is deployed, in most other technologies, you can't take it out. But the biggest advantage for me, I think, is that once the valve is completely deployed, even if that patient develops LVOT obstruction on the table, you can completely retrieve this valve. And that's probably one of the reasons why it's been successful. Now, there are over 100, I'm not going to go in details, but there are clearly over 160 cases done. And if you look at the Tendyne Global Feasibility Study, which is a little less than 100 patients, the 30-day mortality was 6%, and the 1-year survival actually is, I made a mistake in that wording, but the survival is 72% at 1 year. And there's durable MR reduction at 1 year of 98%, and the Summit pivotal study is ongoing, and there's a whole study for Tendyne patients with MAC, because that's the one that you were talking about. There's something which I want to talk about, the Summit trial. This trial should not be realized. Originally, it was designed to have severe symptomatic MR, and then they were considered to be mixed valve disease, functional or degenerative. And if they were mixed valve disease and functional, then they went to the surgical arm and randomized to surgery versus Tendyne. And then everything changed after Mitraclip got approval. So once Mitraclip got approved, this surgical arm study is being redesigned. And so they are potentially going to the FDA asking that the surgical arm study, the randomized arm, should be Tendyne versus clip or surgery. So they haven't got approval yet for this part of the study, but that's the interesting part. In the non-surgical arm, if the valve is suitable for transcatheter repair, is excluded. But if the valve is not cannot be repaired transcatheter-wise, then it should be considered for Tendyne. So but this will not allow it to get a full approval. You need the randomized study. So this is why the randomized study is on hold. The next device is the Intrepid TMVR. It's also a similarly conformable outer stent engaging with the annulus, and the leaflets provide fixation while isolating the inner stent from the dynamic anatomy. And you have a circular inner stent which houses a 27 millimeter tricuspid bovine pericardial valve. And again, with this valve system, basically the way it actually anchors is by radial strength on the annulus, and then you have these little clits which actually anchor on the leaflets. And therefore, you have to oversize them quite a lot to actually have it inside the annulus. And so a lot of cases get excluded because of size. Now, the total number of cases are over 120, and the global feasibility study was 50 patients, and the Apollo pivotal trial is the only study which is really enrolling patients. Now, this is some of the data from that global feasibility study. The 30-day mortality was high, it was 14%, and the one-year survival has been 77%, so most of the deaths occurred early, and no device malfunction, hemolysis, or thrombosis were those who survived, and no mild MR in most of the ones who survived, and 79% of patients who survived were in NYHA class 1. So this is the Apollo trial, which is a randomized study comparing surgery versus TMVR in patients who are high risk but not inoperable, and a single-arm study where the patients are ineligible. Now, I have some quite concerns about this trial. Number one, both degenerative as well as functional MR patients are allowed in the study. And then they are randomized to the control arm. So a lot of them, about 70% of patients are actually functional MR, and the control arm is mitral valve surgery. So I really think this is a problem for me, that especially after the Mitraclip study, COAP trial, I don't think you can have a control arm as mitral valve surgery only. So the option should be clip and/or surgery, and the treatment arm should be TMVR. So anyway, the study is still enrolling, and it's actually quite doing reasonably okay, but there's a lot of exclusions in the protocol. The next valve is the Evoque mitral valve Edwards valve, and this valve, they've gone through a lot of hurdles, and finally this is the last version of it. But there's some important design elements which I actually want to point out. People have talked about LVOT obstruction, and what you can see in this is this valve. You can see that the lower ventricular, first of all, this valve is very short. Second is that the LVOT side is actually rounded inside. And then you can see these anchors basically capture the anterior leaflet. And this is very important because this is one of the few valves which allows you to prevent you from LVOT obstruction. So therefore, it captures the anterior leaflet. And because it's rounded with a shorter LVOT element, this might actually reduce LVOT obstruction. But this is very new. This is the last version. And finally, of course, it comes in two sizes, 44 and 48, and it's a transseptal catheter system. So this is the sizes 44 and 48, and it's a transseptal system which is 28 French, and you can actually deliver it, and there's multiple planes of flexion with independent depth control. And therefore, this can be done transeptally completely. And the first experience, there are only 3 patients done with this size valve. Finally, talking about a valve which can be done transapically or transeptally is the high life. And you can see of the high life, basically you create a ring around the leaflets, and then you deploy the valve in that ring. And this ring has to be deployed transaortic, and it takes some time. But the good news is that the patient is very stable. But once the ring is deployed, the deployment of the valve is not much of an issue. So that's the deployment of the ring, and then transfemoral artery, and then you put the valve inside, which can be deployed either transeptally or transapically. The Edwards Sapien M3 system is a similar system where you have a docking station deployed transeptally, and so the inner coils go below the valve, and then the upper coils above the annulus, and once it's stable, then you deploy a Sapien M3 valve transeptally, just like how you do a valve-in-valve. And this is one of the cases where you can see a valve in place. You can see the coils, and then a transeptal deployment of the valve right through that. So this procedure is entirely done transeptally, and the good news about this procedure is it's quite safe. And then, of course, I didn't talk about the cardio valve, which, since Francesco's over here, he can talk about it. But that's another transeptal valve, which is actually in early feasibility trial, primarily for functional MR. What is the French size? I think 28, right? 32 French. Just a few words about transcatheter treatment of TR. Time, TR affects prognosis, everyone knows that. Functional TMR is the predominant mechanism of TR. In the era of transcatheter valve therapy, there will be a need for addressing TR, and there are several techniques being evaluated in early clinical trials. These are some of the technologies, as you can see. You can annuloplasty, leaflets, stented valves, and valve replacement. I've only mentioned the 2 important ones, the Cardioband and ForTech and Millipede, and Cardioband is the only dedicated device which has been approved for TR. So the Mitraclip in the tricuspid position is the most well-studied transcatheter TR device. I think, as you said, Francisco, there's over 5,000 cases probably. And effectively in over 80% of patients, the Triluminate CE-mark study has almost completed enrollment. And the pivotal study in the US is going to start in July, randomizing it to medical therapy. So this is the first randomized trial starting. And here's an example of one of my patients where I did a Mitraclip and the tricuspid clip. On the same time, I did the Mitraclip, pulled it back to the tricuspid clip. And you can see over here on the left side, this is his severe TR and severe MR. And then 3 months later, the TR is gone. And then the severe MR is mild to moderate. So you can put 2 clips in 2 places, and he had MR, TR. And the important, you can see that the ejection fraction also improved. The Edwards Life Sciences Cardioband is the only CE-mark approved device for tricuspid regurg. It has a series of 15 to 18 anchors implanted in annulus. The early CE-mark study completed, and an early feasibility study is ongoing in the United States. And basically, you can see you cinch it and you reduce the annulus. It takes some time to do this procedure, but if you can get it right, it does reduce TR. And this is some of the data from the TRI-REPAIR study showing that there's a 17% reduction of the septal lateral diameter, which would actually conclusively reduce the TR. Now, this is the ForTech tri-cinch concept. This is a concept which I'm recently very interested in it, and actually the inventor is in the room, which is Francesco's idea, right? And it was a concept of basically cinching the anterolateral part of the annulus and pulling it towards the IVC and actually dragging and therefore leading to a apposition of the anterior and septal leaflet and the posterior leaflet, reducing TR. And what it does consists of a nitinol coil or anchor, which perforates the heart, goes out in the pericardial space, and then you pull it, and then you deploy the stent in the IVC. And this is the catheter. It's a 25 French system, and it's very well controlled. And you have to do some important aspects. First of all, you have to create air inside the pericardial space, and then you should advance the catheter through the anterolateral aspect of the annulus, and then you deploy the nitinol coil, then you pull it, and then under dual control, you can receive the reduction of TR. And you can see over here, this is how it works. You actually reduce, and this is actually causes a significant cinching with a single anchor. And over here, you can go ahead. This is just a patient, and you can see on the top, there's moderate tricuspid regurgitation. And look at the lower frame, you can see over here, the annulus has been cinched and the TR is almost gone. And you can see of the right coronary artery, it's very important to do a right coronary angiogram to make sure there's no kinking of the right coronary artery. So like with this, there are 15 cases treated. It's been reasonably safe. There's effective reduction in septal lateral diameter. And the early feasibility study in the US and Europe are currently enrolling patients. One downside of this procedure, it cannot be done in patients who've had previous open heart surgery. Then the Forma device, which is basically a spacer positioned in the regurgitation area. This is ideally for patients with very severe tricuspid regurgitation and leaflets which are very tethered. So I'd like to end by saying that transcatheter mitral valve replacement and tricuspid repair and replacement is the next frontier. And there are unique challenges in this field, and the ongoing early clinical trials are testing several devices and several concepts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your excellent talk. It seems that we have a long way to go because in the aortic position, one way or another, our devices are similar.
Right.
Here, the diversity of the devices reflects the complex pathophysiology of the mitral apparatus. So we have to see what's going to prevail.
And then if you have so many devices, it becomes difficult to enroll patients in trials because everyone has only a few cases of experience.
That's true. Thank you again.
Thank you.